Tim Traudt and I have no idea how long I've known you, for just a very long time, and his wife Terry is here as well. And Tim is a graduate of Bethel University. He is executive vice president of Wells Fargo, and has responsibilities in this 12-state region. And he is actually one of the very few people I know who is diamond status on Delta Airlines by taking flights to Thief River Falls. You got to take an awful lot of flights to the places that he goes in order to get that kind of status. So he's on the road a great deal. We'll actually talk about that a little bit more. But in my relationship with Tim, we have traveled the world together from the rocky coast of Maine to the hills of Machu Picchu and the Middle East, and we served together on the board of World Relief, the two of us, and his wife Terry, who is a bioethicist, is on the board of the National Association of Evangelicals, who makes her somewhat my boss at NAE. So Tim, thank you for being here and doing this. So I've just got endless questions to ask you.
All right, terrific.
And you've got to be good about this.
Well, I will.
So,
I'll try.
Okay, so give your background. I mean, you're a banker, and
Yeah.
appreciate your dressing the part.
Yeah,
here,
evidently I didn't get the memo. As Leith said, I work at Wells Fargo. I run our wealth management group for the upper Midwest. I've got 12 states, about 1,000 people. We manage about $48 billion, my group does, in investments. Another $9 billion or so on what we call the balance sheet side, the deposit and loan side. And I've been with the company. I'll be celebrating my 32nd anniversary here in about a week or so.
That's even before it was Wells Fargo.
That's right.
And that's
Northwestern National Bank.
Yeah, it's back before the Stagecoach was invented.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, but you're not from here.
No, grew up in Nebraska. I am married to my wife Terry. Leith mentioned she's here. We just celebrated our 30th wedding anniversary a couple of weeks ago, and came up here to Bethel University in 1974. And like every good Nebraskan, when you find a good woman, you hang on to them. And she happened to be a Minnesotan, and here I am.
That was a good choice. All right, so to get right into this, I'm reflecting back on conversations that we have had. And maybe I'm quoting Terry here more than I'm quoting you, but as I recall, in your career you were doing really well, and you came from a church and a faith background, but there was a turning point there. And so what happened?
Yeah. So I was very, very fortunate. Grew up in a Christian home. Mom and Dad loved the Lord. I think I probably attended 4 or 5 services a week, whether I needed to or not. And so I accepted Christ at a young age, and had a mountaintop experience as a kid. I was really excited about the Lord, and went to Bethel. Went to Bethel primarily because I knew I needed the discipline. I was kind of going through that stage of supposedly finding myself a bit, and I thought Bethel would be a safe haven for me, knowing my tendencies. Got into work and actually rose up what I thought was the ladder at the time. It probably really wasn't, but I thought it was a pretty big deal. But I was never really at peace because I was really trying to do a lot of this on my own. And it's amazing what pride does. I think we all probably have crossed that path from time to time. And I was just struggling. I was very, very unsettled. That particular summer, to top it all off, while I'm struggling with kind of where I'm at with my faith and everything at work, I was kind of upset with everything. I don't know. Terry suffered a stroke that summer. And so, we kind of went through this life and death deal, and I kind of had to, I just kind of stopped, paused, said, really, God, is this, seriously? And I was invited by a colleague of mine, actually a direct report of mine. I'm not sure you could get away with this today, because he actually harassed me to attend a Bible study fellowship. I was going to kind of brush up on a couple of the stories, thought I could do it in a week or two and kind of get back on the path. And 13 years later, I got out of Bible study fellowship. I'm a slow learner. And that whole process, Leith, was kind of a pivotal point where I realized that A, it wasn't a big deal, and B, how much I needed God to kind of lead my life. And so I know that maybe sounds a little cliche, but God, Jesus as Savior and Jesus as Lord were very, very different things for me at that time, and that was very a big changing point in my life.
And you engaged in church then?
Yeah, very much then got engaged in church. I think that's when we first were acquainted, and just really, I found by nature I was not a very disciplined person, but I am now. I try to be very, very disciplined in not only my walk, but everything I do at work and everything I do outside of work. And that helped me a lot, and your leadership helped a lot.
All right, so I want to talk about some specifics of bringing faith into the workplace, but how many years with Wells Fargo? 32?
32.
Okay, so Tim is a peer whom I've met, who has another district of Wells Fargo, and his wife and I serve on a board together. And she was telling me this week his work history. My goodness, he's worked for U.S. Bank. I forget all the places he's worked. And so how did you do 32 years in, did you not want to change checking accounts?
Yeah. It's tough to change checking accounts. It's online banking. No, I think there were a couple of things, Leith. And you and I were chatting before about some of the things that have gone on, recently, obviously in the last 4 or 5 years, 6 years in the financial services. Before that, banking was like a utility company. I mean, you never really heard anything bad per se about banking. What I believed in all this time, and I believe very, very strongly in, is the kind of the vision and values of our corporation. So as you know, I mean, corporations don't have a morality, people do, and so people make crazy and dumb decisions. We have 275,000 people in our company. 1 in every 500 working Americans work at Wells Fargo. And when you see your name in the newspaper, not my personal name, but when you see your name in the newspaper doing something bad, you question yourself. You question, should I be here? But I keep going back to this vision and values, and I believe, generally what we do is very, very good. So when you believe in something, you stay with it.
So how can you bring Christian faith and principles into mortgage approval rates from minority persons, foreclosures during a recession, people who are unemployed and maybe should never have had that mortgage in the first place, and your bank granted that mortgage out of undue generosity, and now I don't mean Wells Fargo, but I do mean Wells Fargo, but now you're going to foreclose, and their family doesn't have any place to go. And I mean, as a Christian, how do you put that together?
Well, as I said, I mean, there I think are decisions that have been made along the way that I question. I can say that I have never been asked to compromise my morals or my beliefs in the work that I do. So, but I do struggle. I think it was Warren Buffett said, when the tide goes out, you can see who's wearing swimming trunks or something like that. When the tide went out on this, you could see, some of the bad actors and bad things. And you can't find reconciliation with this concept, well, I'm not as bad as this company or this company or this company because you were part of it. So, Leith, I struggled with it personally, but I still very much believe in the company and generally what we do.
There have been, and there certainly are now, misalignments between what churches are teaching, particularly in issues of human sexuality, people living together, and what occurs within the workplace, but also which in some cases is mandated by law. So what do you do with the misalignment?
Yeah. Well, I think that you do a couple things, and I'll give you an example of this. 3 years ago, I was asked to head up our diversity and inclusion group for our wealth management group, 10,000 people. And the group itself was made up of rebels with and without a cause. I mean, this was quite a group, and the last thing they really wanted to see in there was another slightly aging white guy rolling in. And so I thought this was a good opportunity to broaden the dialogue around what diversity and inclusion was. And so along with another peer of mine who helped me run this, I decided we were going to start this conversation with identity. Identity was a big thing with diversity and inclusion. So I said, let's go, we're going to do this exercise. We're going to have everybody stand up, and you're going to identify yourself. And, oh, that was a great idea. Everybody wanted to hear that. So I thought, well, I'm going to lead this thing off, and I had no idea what I was going to say. As I looked around, I looked very different than most, and I had ideas about others. So I decided to stand up, and I said, you know who I am. I'm Tim Traudt. I'm white, Caucasian. I am married to my wife, Terry, and I am a follower of Jesus Christ. Sat out. And after that, that became the identity. And so I don't really worry so much about what others do or say. I believe that when you work for a company that totally embraces all of diversity and inclusion, I feel like you have a chance to really stand out as who your identification is, and that's being a follower of Christ. So.
But there's a dichotomy. There's a choice here between saying, for anybody that works, especially for a large company, saying, I'm going to run away from this, and this is somebody else's problem, and I'm going to enter it, and I'm going to engage it, which you chose to do, as an opportunity to be a Christ follower in terms of what you did. All right. I want to go to something else and stop me if I shouldn't be doing this. Okay. You invited some colleagues to go on a missions trip. I don't know that they're, I don't know what their faith status is. And so how does that work?
How does that work? Well, I invited a colleague that I have worked with in Minneapolis for a number of years. Jeff was his name, and really had lots of conversations about faith, but I knew he had an interest in the vulnerable. And so I asked him. The risk there, obviously, is he was maybe 3 levels below me technically on an org chart. But I just thought, you know what, I know him well enough, he would say no, and I would be willing to suffer the consequences. I wasn't asking him to accept Christ as his Savior on the spot. I said, I know you have an interest in this. Would you and your family like to join us? That was the easy one. Then I asked the president of our group to join us, and I knew that Jay was a follower of Christ, but you're kind of stepping out of bounds a little bit because this is going to be a personal thing. But we prayed about it. I talked to Terry about it, and I invited him, and he was delighted. And
you invited him to go to Africa?
I invited him to go to Africa.
And to give money?
And to give a bunch of money, yeah, sure.
A big bunch of money.
He gave us a bunch of money. So, but again, this kind of goes back to what I was saying around the diversity and inclusion. If you have to be willing to identify yourself, and I think that's one of the challenges. Yet I was listening to you speak, and by the way, you're a tough act to follow, being up here. But I have to. So I've been asked before: is it hard to be a Christ follower in a work setting? And the answer is yes and no. The yes part is it's hard because if you consciously identify yourself as a Christ follower, it's on your resume. I get introduced at places. I speak at different places, and he's an elder at Wooddale Church. He's on Bethel University board, whatever. They know. They get the sense of where you're coming from, so they're watching you, and so that's when it's hard. Because I think about, I have a really hard time proselytizing. That's hard for me. I'm just by nature, it's just hard. But I do know that along the way, I've admired a lot of people like you, and I've watched a lot of people like you. And when I see people that I admire, I say, what do they have? I want to be like that. So if they know I'm a Christian, I know that I need to act in a way that would enhance God, enhance Christ. And so I know people are watching. And so that's the hard part, because I know they're watching. Sometimes I'm sure that I go home and say, wow, I wish I wouldn't have had that jersey on today, and they wouldn't have identified me as a Christ follower, because I'm not so sure that they're going to say, wow, I want to be one of those right now. And I know that.
What's the difference, and is it easier or harder to live out Christian faith if you're a teller at Wells Fargo or an executive vice president?
Well, that's one job I've never had at Wells Fargo, and it's a good thing, because I'm not really good at...
You're not good with money, right?
I'm not good with money. Well, I could make an argument that it would be harder as an executive vice president.
Why is it?
Because what you say, people actually listen to a lot, and people repeat. I've had people come back and say, you know, I heard you speak 4 years ago when you were in Fort Wayne and you said this, and I'm going, really? Okay. So I know people, you know, and I also know that there are people that would like to trap you, and there are people that would like to see you fall. And I'm not sure how many people want to see a teller fall. I don't know.
In an executive position, you have to fire people.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've faced this, but what would you say if somebody said to you, how can you do this to me if you're a Christian?
Mm-hmm. I've never been asked that. One of the things I do every day is, because I have a lot of pride. I mean, I deliberately pray several verses. I get down on my knees and I pray every morning. I have to surrender my will. I have to surrender my attitude. I have to surrender a lot of things. But one of the verses that I've just really clung to is Micah 6:8, and the loving mercy piece comes out very, very loud and clear. And I think about that. If I was asked that, and I've had to fire a lot of people, and I've had to let a lot of people go over time, and I've had to hire a lot of people. So I have to believe in the greater good. If there's cause, then I have a responsibility, and that is justice. If there's cause, and they need to be fired, and I have no problem with that. I am concerned about their family, but firing, honestly, is a lot easier than letting go because of economic situations where you didn't do anything wrong, but we got to downsize. That's hard.
Where there's cause, it's easier.
Yeah.
Do you like your job?
I love my job.
Do you like to work?
I love to work.
Okay, Teddy Ann, it's up to you to carry it from here.
There we go. Well, you can hear me anyway, because I have a loud voice until this comes on. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for sharing with us. And one of the most important parts about having you share is not just to impart wisdom, but for also to spur our own thinking, right? So I am sure you have many thoughts because of what you've heard tonight. And what we'd like first to do is have this opportunity, about 10 minutes, for us to ask them questions to clarify anything that they've said that you'd like clarified in your own minds. So let's have about 10 minutes of just open mic discussion or questions of these two fine gentlemen. And then we're going to follow that up with some small group time to ask questions among yourself and discuss. And then we'll close the evening by coming back together as a large group and just sharing some of those key thoughts. So with that, questions for Leith or for Tim?
Your job is to ask questions.
Brian.
So this is for you, Tim. Do you want me to use this? I'm curious if what did you call it, Leith, a turning point in your career? If through that process, that commitment to following Christ in your work resulted in anything structural in how you do your work. So beyond the sort of individual aspects of maybe, having mercy with an employee that's difficult, but thinking maybe structurally about the industry or about your particular role in it.
Well, I mentioned I guess the short answer is yes. I mentioned from that rededication, I began every day on my knees, which is a very different place than where I started before. And so it's tough. It's tough to go into work with a chip on your shoulder or feeling pretty big about yourself when you started on your knees. And so that structural habit, I think, has helped guide me. The other thing is, and I don't know, I believe God has an incredible sense of humor, right? Obviously, I'm sitting here today, and that's one of them. But I really, really felt much more of a sense to not have to prove something to others as much as I did. I still have the same passions. I still have the same drive. I still want to win at everything, literally, as my wife knows. But I just have a much different sense of what my purpose is, and that kind of changes things. I'll tell you the other thing it did, honestly, is who owned the money changed. So one of the things that I think about, and this is only probably bankers that get into this kind of thing, but I kind of look at everything that I have the access to is I am co-signed on an account that God has, and he just allowed me, I'm a co-signer on this account. And he can take me off the account, but he's put me on the account. So I look at that much differently, and that visual helps me a lot. So if the numbers get bigger and bigger, this is God's account, and I wouldn't have done that before that. I guarantee you that. And I guess the other thing that I'm working with, and again, when you talk about money side, I work with money. We talk about money, 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 money. That's what we talk about all the time. And so it's very important for me to look at the bank account as his and to start my day on my knees.
All right, next question. Yes, sir.
For both Leith and Tim, relate what you do and have done in your career with work and family. In relationship, then when we see Genesis 1 really clearly, Leith, you outlined for us that it took God work to make this universe and created us in his image. Does me working out in the world or at home look different? It should be the same. Would our spouses or our children say, oh yeah, that's the same guy that is at Wells Fargo or was at Wooddale, and play with that a little bit, and what are the differences, if there are any, and if they are, is it because of our culture, or is it because we've maybe misunderstood the Bible in some way or form?
I want to be cautious what I say here, because I think that the standard answer that we're supposed to say in the evangelical community is work shouldn't be so important that you don't have time for your spouse or your children, and that's a great sin, and that means that you shut off the computer at 5 or that you don't go into the office on Saturday because you have a high and holy calling in your family. That sounds great until you're a single mom who has 3 jobs and you can't feed your family or you can't get medical insurance. So don't say that. I mean, that fits one segment of society and is callous toward people that are doing a good and right thing in a different segment of society. So, like a lot of things, it's circumstantial. But, I want to believe, I can tell you, my own personal stuff. I live a busy life. I don't know that I've ever had a time in my life when I've only had one job. I've joked about being a bivocational pastor, and it's just that it's kind of worked out that way, not because economically I had to do it, I've just done other things. I want to truly believe that my family was really important, and I'm in Charlene, I've had someone who, made up for the things that I couldn't do. But I think the reality is these things are struggles, because what we've got here is a 168-hour week, and we have demands that are for 300 or 400 hours a week. And anybody that has this all figured out and perfect, They don't. They don't. It's a process. And sometimes you do better at it than other times.
Yeah, just to add on that, I think that the whole idea of being balanced in life is kind of a little bit of an oversold concept too. I mean, Leith was sharing the numbers, then you throw the sleep on there, and then you throw commute time, whatever. There's no way you have an equal balance to anything. Again, this is one of the many things I've appreciated about Leith is, I know he travels more than I do, even though I travel more segments than he does, just for the record. He's brought Charlene as part of that from day one. I don't ever remember being on a trip or going anywhere where I don't see Leith and Charlene. So he's made a commitment to that. And Terry and I try to do more and more of that. She isn't that excited about going up to Fargo with me in the winter on a business trip, but no, I'm kidding. But I will tell you this, and this is the last piece on that, is when you ask on the balance piece and how to manage it, I think whether you take someone like Leith, who is known across the world, my guess tells me, and I've seen him in his home, he's the same at home as he would be in front of President Obama. I know that I am not the boss at home. I know, although I like to think I am sometimes, I think we have an equal partnership. And so I don't treat it like it's at work at home. I want to be in that moment when I'm there.
Yeah, let me just add on to that. Charlene and I have a great marriage, and Traudt have a great marriage too. And that makes it easier.
Yeah.
And, I want to have an understanding in terms of ministry in the church. There are people that, I don't mean this unkindly, but they stay at work because it's just too painful to go home. And we need to teach the gospel and the kingdom in ways that relate to people, again, in this variety of circumstances. We need to listen to them and then say, to use one of my favorite analogies, if you go to a physician and the physician writes a prescription in the first minute or two of your time with that doctor, what they're prescribing for is the last patient, not you. And you don't ever want to go back to that doctor, and you probably don't want to fill that prescription. What you want is a doctor who will take an adequate amount of time to figure out who you are and then write a prescription that fits your circumstance. And I truly believe that the teaching of the Bible and the Christian theology and ethic is applicable to a multitude of circumstances, and that is stunning. I mean, it's just really, really good.
Question on this side.
Thank you, Leith, for what you're saying. It just confirms my life attitude, which was nurtured deeply at Bethel also, about work is an essential part of our lives and that we do have dignity. But I'd like to challenge you to be even more of a spokesman for that, because as you spoke about, we work for Jesus in all kinds of occupations, and our status is not from our wages, but for whom we work. I think one of the greatest gifts that the church can give to individual believers is to return that dignity and respect for that person as a working person, male or female, and if they are bringing quality and seeking to, not always successfully, but seeking to enhance God's glory, then they ought to be respected in the church, because far too often the leadership of the church is predicated upon your status in the workplace, as there are those that are better and those that are worse, and been somebody who has supported ministry through an awful lot of blue-collar work. That I've had colleagues and fellow members in churches who, even though they were blue-collar workers, in fact, one of them was a ditch digger for many years, his wisdom in Jesus Christ was a great deal higher than the person who, and I'm not picking on you, Tim, who was a banker that happened to be one of the leaders in the church. And there is a difference between being a Christian filled with God's wisdom and the work that we do in the world to give glory to God. So our work does not matter at a certain level. As you said, there are people who struggle with unemployment. There are those, and does that mean that that person is any less a brother or sister in Jesus Christ? We We need to speak more firmly to returning dignity and respect to the worker.
Just let me respond to several aspects of what you're saying here. There's this guy that wrote the New Testament named James, and he talked about the people that come in with a gold ring. I mean, that's exactly what and you don't get preferential treatment because of the ring that you wear. And while I acknowledge, and I said it tonight, that the Bible is full of identification of people by their profession, that can be taken far too far. And we've got to, it's back to figuring out what's going to work. For many years, my wife Shirley taught 2-year-olds in Sunday school. And she team taught with this guy who's just wonderful. And they had a great ministry, and they were a great team together. Work never came up in the conversation until one day when a little girl had her hand closed in the door of the classroom. It was really hurt. And this guy who was great with 2-year-olds and everything, he sort of took over. And he was really good with her. And it was that day that she found out that he is probably one of the most prominent hand surgeons here in the Twin Cities. But it was a while after that that he found out that her husband was the pastor of the church. And by the way, with a name like Anderson, you can really keep that kind of information quiet because there's so many Andersons. And, I take delight that they found a bond together in Christ and in ministry. And he never needed to know that her husband was the pastor, and she didn't need to know that he was a prominent hand surgeon. Not that those things aren't good and important. So, I think I'm very much in agreement with you, but there are also challenges in this. And the reality is, if you have a donor who can give $1 million, as a church leader, you've got to take them out to dinner and ask them for the $1 million. And you probably can't take everybody out to dinner, so you need to make some discerning choices on that. But respect is due everyone, and that's the right word.
Excellent.
Yeah, this has been really thought-provoking, and I thank both of you for that. And my struggle right now is about the justice piece. And there certainly is the prophetic tradition, not just Micah, but all the prophets and Jesus himself, about wealth and poverty, rich and poor. And how does that influence your daily work is my question for both of you.
Well, it's interesting for me is I work with the top 1%. I am part of the top 1%. At least I'm co-signed on an account that gives me that ability. But my heart is really with the bottom 1%. My heart is more with the vulnerable in many, many ways. Now, there again, I think that's God's great humor. That's where your heart leads. That's where your heart moves. I don't know. That's one of the mysteries of life to me is with 7 billion on the planet, why are 2 billion living on less than $2 a day? Just you go on and on and why are you living in the country you're living in at a time you are with the freedoms and rights and justice system that we have when others are having their home taken away by bad guys because their husband died for no reason, no mortgage in this case, Leith, this is not Wells Fargo. This is what happens. So, I don't know how you reconcile it, but this is what I do know. I can't help everyone. I know that. I know God didn't call me to that, but I can help my neighbor in front of me. And that's what my prayer is for God to show me my neighbor. So that is what I'm called to do in addition to being generous and saying, God, you gave me this. Who do you want in front of? It's interesting. I think Richard Stearns wrote this book, The Hole in Our Gospel. I don't know if you had a chance to read the book. Fabulous book. And he talked about that, about loving your neighbor. I just feel very, very strongly as Christians on all aspects that we all, starting with me, need to do a better job of truly praying that God shows us our neighbor, that constantly showing us our neighbor. That is, I think, a great calling that we too often overlook in our lives, and I would stand at that front of that line.